Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday, and today is apparently National Women's Day. I didn't know that when I planned this content. This is a holdover from the amount of grief I got about this frickin' mannish Aloy thing. And I did a lot of thinking about it over the weekend still, because like I said, I don't like to just dismiss people out of hand because I think they're wrong and probably really overreacting and seeing things that aren't there. I want to understand why the reaction's so strong and why they're seeing things that aren't there. And I started doing like a formal logic experiment where, all right, yes, the structures, the fallacious structures they're using to come to this determination did not start with them. And I tracked it back and tracked it back and tracked it back and tried to find a patient zero for this contagion in horribly fallacious pseudo logic. And I landed on the first damn episode of Tropes versus Freaking Women. So yes, I am talking about this on National Women's Day. If you want to support my endeavors to not pull my punches, even when I'm probably going to eat a ton of shit for this because I was going to do it, so the day of the week shouldn't matter. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or do a one-time coffee thing, the whole buy me a coffee thing, though this is buy a Leanna Care session for someone. Link in the description box below, coffee.com/LeannaK. So, why do I think that first, the damsel in distress, Tropes versus Women started all this bad logic that ends us up with the war on woke and mannish Aloy? Sony first party is conspiring against the FAP. Here's how I got this. I made notes. You may remember back in the day, the idea that Tropes versus Women postulated that Super Mario and games of that era, even back then, were for a presumed male audience. Video games were and are made for a presumed male audience by default. You have to take active measures for it not to be a presumed male audience. That is one of the central theses in the Tropes versus Women series. Now, first of all, it doesn't make any inherent sense. If somebody's making a presumption, that's not neutral. That's a deviation from neutral, right? That's making a choice. And the whole presumed male audience for video games, games are for men. That didn't start with Tropes versus Women. It certainly got popularized among the alleged thinking classes in video games by Tropes versus Women. Here's the problem. When it comes to the original NES Super Mario Brothers, it's wrong. Super Mario Brothers was not made for a presumed male audience. It was made for adults and kids, but also boys and girls, because Super Mario was originally developed for a Japanese audience that doesn't have the same segregation. Yes, they have it with like shonen and shoujo and all that stuff, but manga isn't for boys. Shoujo manga is for girls. Shonen manga is for boys, right? The entire medium of manga is not assumed to be for boys. Same with video games. Because in the Japanese market, there was never an Atari crash. And so they didn't have to sneak the NES in as a toy. And it was toy gendering that led to that. But Super Mario came bundled with the NES, so it wasn't made with that in mind. So the whole idea that all the analysis of Princess Peach and the damsel in distress and all that being some sort of social programming aimed at a presumed male audience, it's fallacious. It's wrong. And that's why I'm saying this is the source of the poison. This is the patient zero. Because it's provably wrong, right? And so what happens? Well, then they say, oh, but it's death of the author. We don't use authorial intent. We're using analysis. But they're saying that and then claiming presumption. So if the author is dead, who's making the presumption it's for men? And here we have the logic loop. Here we have the feedback loop. Here we have the fallacious thought, right? So I'm calling this state of analysis in video games the authorial coma. The author's not quite dead. The author's in a coma. And whenever somebody wants to cherry pick something, they wake the author up, say, aha, this is your intent based on this. And then they put them back in the coma so they can postmodern deconstruction everything up the wazoo and just back up their preconceived emotional knee-jerk instead of actually looking at facts. Everybody's doing that now. Everybody is, I have a feel, let's make it sound good. And by everybody, I don't mean literally everybody. I mean every faction, right? It is, well, they can do it, why can't we? You know, this reaction among people who are like, yeah, we are the presumed male we are the presumed males that video games are for. Well, that's not true of all video games. AAA games, yes. You know, even the Switch is more male consumers than female consumers, although the demographic breakdown on the Switch is very interesting. And just because more men than women own a Switch doesn't mean the marketing for the Switch is exclusively or even primarily aimed at men. They switch it up, pardon the pun. But because of this authorial coma that Tropes versus Women popularized, games are being analyzed like statements from the Federal Reserve Chairman. Like, one statement made in a press is like read like tea leaves and all that stuff. And, you know, when you talk to actual devs, they're not saying what they mean. They're saying what PR wants them to say. And people don't believe me that you can't trust that the stated intent is actually the intent. And you know what? There's an argument to be made that if they say it in public, that's relevant. I agree with that. It's just, it might be relevant, but it's not reliable, right? And the question is, do we want the truth or do we want to hang somebody on bad PR messaging? No right or wrong answer there. Just, you know. But it goes deeper with this presumed male audience authorial coma. Because that presumed male audience point of fallacious analysis has become a straitjacket of stereotypes. Men are essentially half the population. Some people say there's slightly less, but men, broad strokes, are half the population. Because of that, please tell me what a presumed male audience means. How does that translate? Because last I checked, men, like women, are a very diverse group that have a lot of you know, there are gay men, there are straight men, there are bisexual men, there are pansexual men, there are white, black, Asian, South Asian, you know, indigenous. There are a lot of subcategories of men. Transgender, cisgender, yes, but because, you know, trans men are a tiny portion of the male demographic. Okay, we could say fair assumption. Primarily cisgender men they're appealing to, but I don't even know you can say that. And, you know, certain games like Dream Daddy, I'm not even sure that game was primarily aimed at men. I think it might be women, but women and, you know, gay men, you assume. But that doesn't mean a straight man can't play Dream Daddy, right? But let's face it, this whole presumed male audience, it's not how Tropes versus Women applied their analysis. And it's not how the people who have been influenced and or terrified by tropes versus women have applied that analysis. The presumed male audience also presumes that male audience, first of all, should be player base. But they assume that it's white, straight, cisgender men, which is why in Boss Fight I was like, WSCM, you know, because it's over and over and over again. We need an acronym because WSCM. And this is where my mind gets blown, and this is where I start getting really frustrated because, again, fallacious. Do we really assume that a game made in Japan, say Fire Emblem Fates, right, which was sort of a surprise crossover hit on the Nintendo DS, they really underestimated demand for that game. Made by Japanese developers, localized for the US, primary audience was not the US. So why are we presuming that game was made for white dudes? Right? It doesn't make any sense. And she doesn't come out and say, oh, it's for white dudes, but even Mario, that game was made for the Japanese market and was released later in North America. Super Mario 2 wasn't even the same game in Japan as it was in the US, right? Like, this idea that games are maybe Western developers still have that crutch in their head that it's primarily or exclusively for white people. But then you look at the data and you recognize a greater percentage of black people play games than white people. Now, okay, black people are a smaller portion of the demographic in North America, but considering the higher adoption rate among black people across the board, and especially black men, well, you'd think you'd put in some stuff for them too, right? And, so on and so forth. But this is where it gets extra stupid, okay? Because what I determined is because of the influence of this presumed male audience and all the guilting and the idea that the presumed male audience is against women versus women, all these tropes are versus women. Again, completely fallacious. A trope has no feelings. A trope has no motivations. A trope is just a meme with pretension, right? It's just a unit of something, There's no inherent value to the damsel in distress trope. It's how it's used. There's no inherent value to the knight in shining armor trope. It's how it's used, right? There's no inherent value to the evil wizard trope. It's how it's used, right? I mean, the Dragon Age games are a shining example of inversion of tropes, right? The Arthurian myth, the sexy witch, the crone in the woods, the Baba Yaga type thing, so on and so forth. The Joan of Arc style figure. Those are all tropes that they all invert. And those characters, peel back like onions, layers of onions. And this is what I determined that the real problem with both the influence on game dev and by way of the just thoughtless parroting of this fallacious idea in the games press. Because it's because developers are afraid of the games press, not because they just want to make boring women in their games. AAA game development has become about the guilty suppression of presumed male fantasy. So let me make that clear because I stumbled on the word. There is this guilt over the idea of male fantasy and the presumptions that this authorial coma analysis makes about this platonic ideal of male fantasy, right? There's somehow this idea, this abstraction of male fantasy that applies to every single man somehow, unless you're better, but not really, right? Because that's privilege. But there's this guilt, and therefore the focus has been on suppression of the male fantasy. Negative, pulling away, taking less, right? Choke it down. instead of a truly inclusive approach, which is finding a way to also appeal to popular female fantasies. Like, bring women in. Don't just strip all the fun, sexy, affirming stuff out of it for guys. Bring women in too. Why do I think this is a better approach than what Game Dev's doing? Well, because look at the covers of women's magazines. That's not some sort of mind control from the patriarchy. That is what women want to buy, because nobody's forcing you to buy Cosmo or Vogue or Elle, right? And that's where advertisers aimed at women want to put their ads, because women enjoy reading this stuff. And you're seeing more and more like visual bras, cutout dresses. They predicted this as COVID started to wane, that fashion would go kind of crazy because people have been cooped up and they want to be seen now, right? And so you're seeing a lot of bras on the outside in dresses with women. This is not women being forced to wear these clothes against their will. These are women who feel confident in themselves, wanting to wear these clothes because they want to. And there are some people who will then go, well, they're traitors to their gender, or it's internalized misogyny, or yes, women do it, but it's not feminist. And here's the problem with all of that. Remember I said last week that video games should operate on the paradigm of art entertainment, not politics? Well, while one can, if one so chooses, do a feminist analysis of games, whatever that means. Feminism is another term that is just too big now to be of any use. Or is it sex negative feminism, sex positive feminism, hegemonic white feminism, oppositional black feminism? Trans inclusive feminism, trans exclusive feminism. What kind of feminism is it? We don't know from just the F word, right? We don't. The word has no meaning anymore because the applicable definition is just too fuzzy. So because of that, because even you have to define what you mean by feminist analysis, even to take a crack at it. There should not be a requirement, nor I'd say even necessarily a desire, to design a game as feminist. Because that's not art anymore. Now that's being political and an activist and propagandistic. Because feminism is allegedly about the advocation and advancement of women's rights, right? It's impossible to make a story, whether it be a game, a film, anything like that, because a game, a film, a TV show is a story about specific people doing specific things in specific places and specific times. It is absolutely impossible, especially with our pluralistic multicultural society, to make any single product about women. That's that hegemonic white LGBTQ plus exclusive, mainstream second wave feminism. That was the problem with it, is they attempted to speak for all women and they just couldn't. And that's fine when you're looking at something like wage equality, right? But when you're talking about depictions in media, it falls apart, And you can do thought experiments. You can talk about your reactions to something. You can say, hey, this didn't really work. This was kind of a mess. You can talk about how something gave an unintended message, so on and so forth. But that's, again, on the reaction side. That's on the analysis side. I'm making a game right now about a fairy tale princess. It's about a character that basically is, let's try to redeem characters like Princess Peach. Because tropes versus women made them the enemy for some odd reason, and they're really not. I keep hearing women tell me privately, well, what if I want to be feminine? Why is that bad? Why is being feminine somehow traitorous to being female? That doesn't make any sense to me. And in playing the character, I realized it's a very interesting gameplay challenge to design gameplay around a character like that and not go into the Smash Brothers, well, she just, starts beating people up, because the whole Mario pantheon, for lack of a better term, has become like repertory theater. At this point, they're just actors that end up in different parts, right? And every so often they go back to the well, and then Peach drives a cart, and then Peach beats people up in Smash, and they're actors at this point more than anything. But Princess Sparkle Muffin's not like that. She's a nice and kind of sheltered princess who likes pretty dresses and sparkly jewelry and likes to read and doesn't get out much. That's an interesting challenge. To me, that's an interesting starting point for an adventure. How do you have a character like that have an adventure where they save something without violating that, without turning her into a completely different person? That's an interesting design challenge to me. And somebody would say, but that's a damsel in distress. Well, yes, she is. And she's the center of her own story. So? But that's a trope against women. No, it's fucking not. And here's why. Do we assume that games featuring men are about all men? Do we say all men are defined by, say, Grand Theft Auto? No, we say it's toxic masculinity, right? If you say anything at all, you could say it's about American masculinity. Okay, fine, but it's a very American story, right? It isn't all men. You never hear this is a game about men. Now, I mean, it's funny, the article I wrote for Polygon, which was me going, this is bullshit, to another thing that Polygon wrote about. I defended Gears of War as a game that showed tough guys talking to each other about their feelings, and that's a good thing. And I got written off as an SJW because of Polygon on the header. See, nobody paid attention. Nobody paid attention because nobody gave it a chance. It was all these presumptions, right? It was all these, we presume who writes for Polygon. We presume who reads Polygon. We presume who Polygon is for, who Polygon is against, right? But the only characters in video games that aren't presumed to be embodiments of their entire subcategory of humanity are white, straight, cisgender men. Those white, straight, cisgender men are able to be individuals. Everybody else is an embodiment of their state. And that's not okay when you're coming at something artistically, when you're coming at something creatively, even when you're coming at something from an entertainment perspective, right? And this is where we get into all the bullshit surrounding Horizon Zero Dawn, where, oh, they made her mannish. There's no intent to make her mannish. There's no evidence anywhere. There is no developer saying, yeah, we wanted to make her look like a man. That doesn't exist. There are stupid public statements from the Mortal Kombat developers, ton around The Last of Us 2, even some stuff around Mass Effect Andromeda that you could interpret that way. There's nothing from Guerrilla Games about that, and people still hang on to it. Authorial coma, right? But then the other side oh, they're appropriating indigenous American stuff. No, they're not. It's Neolithic humans. But the CBC ran a piece quoting they happened to find 4 people that had a reaction. And, Sony just responded, no real life societies are depicted in Horizon Forbidden West. And that's it. I mean, I thought that was a brilliant response. Because that is their intent. Is anybody going to listen to that? No. People who think that, oh, they're appropriating Native American stuff. Okay, which Native American stuff? Because I've seen both. Oh, they copied our culture, but then they got it wrong. Well, then maybe they weren't copying indigenous culture, or indigenous American culture. Maybe they were borrowing from Aboriginal Australians with the white chalky faces. Or maybe just saying they were taking Neolithic face paint designs and basing it on that. And Neolithic featherwork and beadwork and hide work. And, maybe that's where it came from and not modern day indigenous culture. And maybe that's why it looks wrong, because it was never that to begin with, which is what they said, which is what they say it is. If you look at what Guerrilla Games has said on the record, it's there's more straight up Mayan imagery and Mongolian imagery in Horizon Forbidden West that I can see than anything even remotely approaching any modern day indigenous culture. But authorial coma. Back to sleep, developer. We're going to talk about you. We're going to presume your intents. We're going to say what you were doing. That's not... It used to be you got smacked down if you submitted papers that made those sorts of logical mistakes. You have to defend your statements with something, or you used to have to defend what you were saying with something other than a presumption or a feeling. At least give me something to start with where you can induce or deduce your conclusion or even your hypothesis. Give me something. A presumption is not enough. And that's what we need to get back to. And here are the faulty presumptions that have to go. One is that women have a problem with sexy women. No, there are different kinds of sexy. I don't know. Most of the women I know are good with sexy women as long as it feels confident and not it's the Golden Girls Blanche Devereaux quote, she's with men because she likes them, not to make them like her. That's the litmus test, the Blanche Devereaux test. Let's throw out the Bechdel test. Let's throw out everything else. Let's use the Blanche Devereaux test as the feminist test for art. If a woman is sexual, she's doing it because she likes somebody else, not to make them like her. That works a lot better. Trust me. Because then women are allowed the entirety of the human experience. Women are allowed to be in various states of undress. Women are allowed to be aggressive. Women are allowed to show interest in other people. Women are allowed to be fully fledged human beings. And not a presumed commodity for a male consumer base. Like, let's stop that. Even if it's, say, 70% true. I think the Switch install base is 71, 70%, 79% male, something like that. Okay, fine. That doesn't mean each game is played by that breakdown. But it also, hey, if you got 20 to 30% of your player base represented by somebody else, just give them some stuff too. Don't do anything to actively insult them. And give them some fun too. Be inclusive. not exclusive. Let's stop creating art from a paradigm of guilt and shame. Happy National Women's Day. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Or link to coffee for a one-time donation in the description box. Thanks for watching.